It was a dark and, I have to say, dingy evening. There we both were, Gromit and myself, seated in our lounge, deep in concentration. Gromit, as ever, had his head buried in one of those up-to-the-minute scientific books, so beloved of your average dog, while, ensconced in my favourite armchair, I was wrestling with a particularly knotty problem. We'd a bank holiday coming up a week or two hence, and scattered all about me I'd travel brochures, volumes on holiday fun, magazines about desirable destinations. As I remarked to Gromit, where to go? It's a problem to decide. I pondered over camping today, but frankly you can't trust the weather. Then I considered the colourful prospectus of Club 18 to 45 holidays, lively getaway vacations for the younger set, but I thought, would we fit in? How would we cope with the dancing and the volleyball? As I flicked through the International Picnic Guide, I decided on what is always a very present help in time of trouble. "Tell you what, Gromit lad," I said, "let's have a nice hot cup of tea." We always have the kettle nicely at the boil, and I'd soon got the teapot full, the cupboard open, and the tray loaded with cream crackers. The whole operation was trouble-free until I opened the fridge. "Oh, no cheese, Gromit!" I cried. My heart sank. Not a bit in the house. But as I sipped my tea and munched my dry cream crackers, I suddenly had one of my notions. "Gromit, that's it. Cheese. We'll go somewhere where there's cheese." I was already searching through the guide to cheese holidays for places you find cheese. Lancashire, Cheddar, Wensleydale, Philadelphia, Tesco's, when I happened to glance out of the window. Gromit glanced out of the window. Then Gromit and I glanced at each other. We'd seen the self-same thing, up there, high in the sky. We'd seen the moon. "That's where we'll go, Gromit. We'll go to the moon. Everybody knows the moon's made of cheese." I could hardly wait to get down to the cellar and start inventing our transport to the moon. But I did, of course. I waited till I'd finished my tea and crackers. Then down the steps I went to my trusty old pencil and drawing board and began designing. First I designed what seemed to be a plover's egg, most odd. And then, in my haste, I designed a game of noughts and crosses. But finally, the noughts won, by the by. I'd got the hang of the matter and was designing a rocket. This was more like it. In the middle of the rocket, I designed a cosy cabin for Gromit and me. That, I dare say, would be where we should operate the flying instruments. Beneath the rocket, I added the final touch, a great burst of flame and explosion that would blast us off into space. The designs complete, I got down to the manufacture. I had an old door lying about the cellar. I leant it across a pair of wooden trestles and was soon cutting it to shape. In my eagerness, I made one tiny mistake. I sawed straight through the door, which was pleasing, and through one of the trestles. Oh! Which was a pity. I needed help. I needed Gromit. I'd left him upstairs studying electronics for dogs, a volume that has stood us both in fine stead over the years. I whistled, and down he came to the cellar, where I lay the wooden door across his back and continued sawing. Gromit was not best pleased, but he certainly made a fine trestle. Over the next few days the rocket took shape. We hammered, we drilled, Gromit soldered, and I painted. Soon the metallic hull gleamed with a russet hue. Patches of Gromit also gleamed with a russet hue. My paintbrush had dripped over him. At last the moment came when we could stand back, look up, and admire our handiwork. The moon rocket loomed above us. It was huge. I patted Gromit. My thanks for a job well done. Come Bank Holiday Monday, Gromit was installed at the controls of our rocket, headphones about his ears, testing our electronic instrumentation, whilst I was checking the creature comforts we'd installed in the cabin. Deck chair, beach ball, travel rug, umbrella, plastic Mac, all part of a British bank holiday maker's essential equipment. And, of course, my favourite old tennis racket, in case we met up with some lunar athlete. For our final tests, I took the headphones from Gromit, placed them about my own ears, and was soon able to announce, "Everything seems to be under control. Time to be on our way." I went to the exit door, only to be wrenched by the ears and hurled to the floor. Ow! Dear me, I'd forgotten to remove the headphones. Soon, however, I stood, box of Easy Strike household matches at the ready, over the fuse that would ignite our blast-off. With a deep breath and, of course, a lighted match, I ignited the fuse. As it sparked, I mounted the ladder to the cabin. 60 seconds to blast off. All our lights and instruments flashed in a most satisfactory manner, which served to remind me of another vital stage in our pre-takeoff routine. Lock the doors. As I secured the exit, above us the metallic trapdoor in the pavement outside 62 West Wallaby Street slid open. Hanging, silent and silver in the starlit sky, was the moon itself, as though in welcome. I felt I could touch it. I reached out, but I couldn't. The moon is, as I pointed out to Gromit, a very long way away. Then a thought struck. I rummaged in my trusty old kit bag. There was Gromit's knitting, there was our flask of tea, but no crackers, Gromit. We've forgotten the crackers. We couldn't go all the way to the moon to sample its cheese with no cream crackers. I tugged open the door, slid down the ladder, hurried up the steps to the kitchen, wrenched open the cupboard and grabbed every packet of cream crackers. Only 10 seconds to blast off, so I made my way post-haste back to the rocket. 1 second to blast off, and then, well, blast off! In point of fact, very little happened at blast off until I remembered to release the handbrake. Then I was thrust back into my chair, a bowl of fruit leapt wildly on the whatnot, and we were on our way to the moon. Interplanetary flight was not altogether comfy at first. what with lights flashing and buttons waggling in and out. But once our course was set, Gromit got the playing cards out and, as so often of a bank holiday, demonstrated his shuffling skills, whilst I settled down with the local paper. Well, when you come to think of it, what else is there to do on a lengthy flight to the moon? If we'd been going as far as Mars, I'd have taken a good book. I dug out the camera, gave the lens a jolly good clean, a picture-taking tip passed on down the generations in our family, and snapped Gromit. Now hard at work building a house of cards. One for the album, I suggested. As the minutes ticked by, various of our instruments started slowing down. Strange. But all was explained when from a slot in the flight panel up popped a freshly made piece of toast. The bread had been preset, of course, back in West Wallaby Street. Nicely done, was my judgment. I was appreciatively flicking the last crumbs from my pullover when a blue light began to flash and warning signals rang out. I glanced through the window. The moon was nearly upon us. It certainly was most cheese-looking. Adjust angle of thrust, I ordered, but as Gromit was engrossed in the completion of his house of cards, I carried out my own order. Steady now! Stop! Gently does it! I told myself as Gromit lowered his last pair of cards into place. I felt the rocket touch down and applied the handbrake. Sadly, the impact was too much for the house of cards, and it collapsed beneath Gromit's nose. For a moment he wore a disgruntled air, and I felt a twinge of regret. But needs must when you're landing a rocket on the moon. I can only describe the lunar landscape as spiky, in that the moon was covered with any number of spikes, some as high as a hill, others as low as an average man's ankle sock. As Gromit and I made our way, bearing our bank holiday leisure equipment, across the flat expanses between the spikes, I was overcome with a carefree urge to kick our beach ball high into the lunar air. In fact, I kicked the ball that hard, it simply went on rising and rising until it was no longer to be seen. In orbit around the moon, I presume, to this day. We settled on a picnic spot, and I proposed a nice drop of tea. Get the taste buds going. Soon my thoughts turned to matters of cheese. Gromit passed me the essentials, a plate, a knife, and a cream cracker, and I sliced into the nearest cheesy-looking lunar spike. I placed a portion on a cream cracker and bit in. Well, the taste had me foxed. What manner of cheese was this? Say what you think, I told Gromit as he gave our sample a thorough sniffing. Wensleydale, I ventured, but my companion shook his head. I continued testing, but had to confess, I dunno, lad. It's like no cheese I've ever tasted. So I proposed a new plan. Let's try another spot. We'd gone but a short way when I was surprised to notice, alone among the lunar spikes, what I can only describe as a penny in the slot machine. Except a label announced it accepted nothing but 10p pieces. It was clearly some sort of a, if I might be technical for a moment, some sort of a moon machine. Never one to resist an experiment, I pushed a 10p piece into the appropriate orifice. No response. Not even when I tested one of the handles. Come on, stupid. which I fear came away in my hand. Daylight robbery, I complained to Gromit as we went in search of further adventures in cheese. It seems, however, that once Gromit and I had set off, the 10p finally dropped, and the moon machine came to life. Angular metallic arms popped from its side, gave its head a good scratch, and straightened its somewhat wiggly aerial. The machine had a drawer where you and I have, if you'll pardon the expression, tummies. And from this drawer the machine must have taken its telescope and spotted the remains of our picnic. I'm putting two and two together here, for when we returned later on, our cups and saucers were gone, and so was Gromit's best bowl, secreted no doubt in the machine's abdominal receptacle. The machine had also purloined, in all innocence, I dare say, a brochure advertising economy skiing holidays, presumably dreaming of whizzing its way up and down the snow-covered slopes of Switzerland or Austria or some such. You'll be wondering what Gromit and I were up to. Well, we'd settled on another part of the moon, with our knife, our plate, and our cream crackers, still testing cheese. Engrossed as I was, I barely noticed when Gromit spotted something behind me. I'd just essayed my latest conjecture, camembert, when I heard the unmistakable tones of a slot machine running out of money. I stood up in some alarm, only to find the top of my head assailed by a weighty object that looked like nothing so much as a police truncheon. Ow! Held in the metallic fist of our friend, the moon machine. Or was it our friend? Just in case, I took charge of the truncheon, but made what might have been a slight misjudgment by feeding another 10p piece into the machine's coin slot. Out of curiosity, I suppose, forgetting it killed the cat. Any road, Gromit and I had barely begun to mount the ladder to our space rocket when the moon machine was once again on our track. Could it have been vexed by the slices of lunar cheese I was carrying in the picnic basket? For no sooner had we climbed into our cabin than the machine was attempting to mount the ladder in pursuit. To no avail, mind you, it hadn't the feet for it, you see. Simply little round casters, as is the nature of machines. The moon machine bustled angrily about outside, whilst myself and Gromit hurried to our instrument panel. Emergency countdown, 10 seconds and counting. It would be as well to get a wiggle on, I thought, as the machine had produced a tin opener and was having a good go at our rivets. Time to give Gromit and myself something of a pep talk. Hold tight and think of Lancashire hot pot. As the countdown got underway, the machine removed a square of metal and clambered into the nether regions of our rocket. It was interfering with our mechanical arrangements. Not only that, it had discovered our easy strike household matches. This could cause a bit of bother, particularly in the light of our emergency countdown coming to an end with no result. The fuse, I reminded Gromit. You forgot to light the fuse. Whether or not the moon machine heard my words, I couldn't say, but at that moment, we suddenly found ourselves in blast-off mode, and the machine, its hands desperately clutching a pair of metal strips from the hull, was flung from our rocket. As we hurtled into space, Gromit and I looked down to see the moon machine fashioning those metal strips into a thoroughly functional pair of skis. In a matter of moments, it was fulfilling what must have been the dream of a lifetime, assuming that machines have dreams, or indeed lifetimes as we know them. It was skiing, up, down, over, and around the hills and slopes of the moon. Then, as we sped on our way, the machine paused in its sporting, looked up, and waved. As I settled down to a plate of lunar cheese and cream crackers, I realized we'd brought pleasure to what appeared to be the entire populace of the moon. Set coordinates for 62 West Wallaby Street, I requested of Gromit, as I flicked through my latest copy of Cheese Monthly and reflected on a most satisfactory bank holiday. Altogether, a grand day out. Generally speaking, your average dog takes little interest in birthdays. Not so Gromit. On the great day, he's up early, sorting through the post, casting aside electricity bills, swimwear brochures, and tempting offers of lawnmower renovation until he finds that special envelope, a card addressed to himself. This particular birthday, I let myself doze a little late, while Gromit executed his annual ritual, until I heard from downstairs a familiar tune as Gromit opened the ingenious greeting card I'd sent him. Then I pressed the breakfast button on my morning arrangements console. "My turn for breakfast," I announced, forgetting I'd installed some new arrangements. The bed tilted upright. "Steady on!" and I slid via the dining room ceiling into my trousers, waiting some 20 feet below. Gromit was hid behind the morning paper, but suddenly he depressed a plunger on the tabletop, thus activating a sizable dollop of plum jam, which sped above the table towards me. I sat unblinking in my chair until a slice of finely judged toast leapt from the electric toaster, intercepted the plum jam, and made a perfect landing on the plate in front of me. Well, that went as well as could be expected, Let's see what's on the 905, shall we? I was referring to the model railway we'd been laying to facilitate transport of goods from one room to another, thus avoiding unnecessary carrying and possible damage to fingers and the like. Sure enough, the 905 passed through the dining room loop dead on time. Here she comes now. Oh, I wonder what this could be. I'd lifted from atop one of the 905's freight vehicles a cheerfully gift-wrapped box and handed it to Gromit. "Happy birthday, Chuck!" As Gromit opened the box and revealed the bright red collar and lead within, I could see from his furrowed brow and solemn expression that he appreciated the serious thought I'd applied to choosing his present. "You look like somebody owns you now." The collar and lead were but the first part of his treat, and I led Gromit to the next room, where, I'm afraid, he cowered against the wall in some alarm. My guess is he was disturbed by the sight of an enormous pair of legs ensconced in festive pink paper walking in from the kitchen. "I think you'll find this present a valuable addition to our modern lifestyle," I commented, as I unwrapped the gift to reveal a pair of metallic trousers, handily broad at the waist and magnetic at the boot. These were techno trousers, originally developed for space exploration purposes. Fantastic for walkies! This I demonstrated by attaching Gromit's brand new lead to a suitable point on the techno trousers and programming in on their control panel walkies and 20 minutes. The trousers set off for the front door at a fine lick. Gromit was a mite baffled at first, but soon got the idea when he was violently tugged from the room and yanked down the hallway. "Have a nice walk, Gromit!" While Gromit was, no doubt, enjoying a merry time in the local park, I buried my head in our household accounts. They looked by no means rosy. Thorny, more like. There was no use prevaricating around the bush. To make ends meet, we'd simply have to take in a lodger. By the time the techno-trousers returned with Gromit, I'd already inserted a room-to-let notice in our front window. Gromit, busy knitting a winter-weight pullover in sky blue, barely looked up when a visitor called, a development to which I'd been alerted by the ringing of the front doorbell. Our visitor had come about letting the spare room, and I proudly showed him around our humble abode. "I'm asking 20 a week. That would include your breakfast. I suppose you'd like kippers. Did I mention our prospective lodger was a penguin?" Quietish type he was, but I tried to enthuse him over the advantages of the spare room. Bit dingy, but it's surprising what a lick of paint can do. Whether or not the penguin was taken with the brown decor and cobwebs, I couldn't say, but I drew his attention to a favourite family heirloom, believed to be a portrait of my own great-grandmother. Mind, it had become a little faded with time, so it might have been a stag at bay. Anyway, it was when its nail gave way and the picture fell to the floor that I spotted our visitor was no longer enthralled. In point of fact, he wasn't even there. I discovered him in Gromit's room, happily testing the bed and trying the radio. Well, he seemed pleasant enough, so I left him to it. The next task was to decorate the spare room for Gromit. As I tried to cheer him up with my philosophy on the efficacious merits of fresh licks of paint, Gromit busied himself with the techno-trousers. Instruction manual aloft, he climbed inside the metallic breeches, and after a couple of false starts, involving the staples of his manual sticking themselves to the soles of his magnetic boots, he was away. Up the wall he climbed, clinging on with the magnetic boots, you understand, and clutching a paint roller, and marched to the middle of the ceiling, which he began whitewashing. "Wonderful things, these techno-trousers," I enthused, just as our new lodger, the penguin, passed by. From the hard look he gave them, he too was mightily impressed with Gromit's trousers. Next day, while Gromit was engrossed in what I believe is a favourite political text among thinking dogs, Pluto's Republic, I was pleasantly surprised when the lodger brought me both my best slippers and the morning paper. "What do you think of that then, Gromit? Our paying guest, He didn't concur with my enthusiasm, and later on, while the penguin and myself were sharing a pleasant supper of cheese and a nice drop of Bordeaux wine, he made himself scarce. Apparently, he packed a few essentials, his brush, a bone, and a sentimental picture of the two of us together in a knotted kerchief, and took himself off into the night. Most un-Gromit-like. He's certainly taken against our new lodger. Mind you, even I was, looking back, the tiniest bit mystified as to why the penguin was quite so keen on borrowing one of Gromit's electronic books, and why he showed quite such an interest in his trousers. The techno-trousers, that is. I was soon to get an inkling. The The following day found me relaxing in bed when all of a sudden my morning arrangements swung into action without my prompting. I found myself sliding via the dining room ceiling into my trousers, but they were the wrong trousers. I'd found myself standing not in my familiar corduroys, but up to my middle in the techno trousers. Not only that, the techno trousers seemed to have developed a life of their own. My legs were being forced up and down like a robot. Why was I walking against my will? And where was the control panel? Had Gromit taken it? Before I could answer any of those questions, another query sprang to mind. Where was I going? The trousers were taking me out of the house, down the front drive, and off along the street towards town. It seems that Gromit had still got the hump. He was looking on a notice board for rooms to let when he spotted one of those police wanted notices inserted by the boys in blue. A reward was being offered for information leading to the arrest of an unusual-looking villain who, according to Gromit, sported on his head the sort of red floppy wattle characteristic of your average cockerel, but beneath had the distinctive black and white body and webbed feet of, well, Gromit couldn't quite place it. I happened to spot him grappling with the puzzle as the techno trousers walked me along the street in a series of most unwelcome maneuvers. I was raced back and forth, turned upside down, flung in the air, even though, quite frankly, I'm not one for acrobatics. The wrong trousers have gone wrong. Gromit had been following my antics, and it was about then he spotted the penguin. All unbeknownst to me, he was sat behind a fence operating the control panel he'd clearly purloined from the techno trousers. What a shocking calamity! I was exhausted by now, and when the trousers took me back home to West Wallaby Street, relieved to tug my pyjama bottoms over the trousers and sink into the welcoming embrace of my own bed. Oh. Meanwhile, Gromit took it upon himself to indulge in a spot of detective work. It seems that whilst I was lost in the land of Nod, he followed our penguin to an area of alleys, dustbins, and abandoned rubbish bags, unfamiliar to most of us more sober citizens, round the back of the City Museum. There, with notable presence of mind, he climbed into a handy cardboard carton in which he fashioned a peephole to keep watch. He observed the penguin make notes concerning the museum's layout, measurements of its height, and of one particularly large and significant window. What could he be up to? What was he planning? Back home, Gromit continued his investigations. For obvious reasons, I failed to join him. In the penguin's room, he'd just made the disturbing discovery of plans for an exhibition of diamonds at the City Museum when he heard the front door open and close. I'm afraid I didn't, for obvious reasons. The penguin was home. I was quite unaware that Gromit had hid himself under my own bed covers, and I never saw the penguin hurry along the landing. I failed to spot he was wearing on his head a red rubber glove. It made him look the very image of the feathered felon Gromit had earlier observed on the wanted poster. Neither did I notice the mysterious red crash helmet he placed on my head, nor did I see myself clamber out of bed in the techno trousers and clump off out of the house. You may think me remiss, but there were obvious reasons. What happened next seemed to me as a dream, a nightmare, you might almost say. I seemed fast asleep, and guided by the techno-trousers, I strolled through town to the rear of the city museum. There, the magnetic boots made their way up the wall, with myself stretched horizontal in mid-air, and a mysterious stranger perched on my chest, until he leapt from me onto a window ledge while I carried on to the top of the building. Seemingly, I made my way across the roof to a large metal structure with something of the look of a ship's funnel, only different. This must have been the air conditioning vent, as, quite careless of the blood rushing to my head or any collywobbles I might be feeling, the trousers led me upside down into its huge mouth and through what seemed many a mile of internal piping until I arrived at a grill above the museum's grand exhibition hall. Trance-like, you understand, I opened the grill, stepped upside down into the exhibition hall and marched across the ceiling, vaguely aware, I seem to think, of dinosaur skeletons, Egyptian mummies and such like below, until I was dangling just short of a beam of red light. A laser beam would be my guess, part of the alarm system. On the window ledge beyond, I was vaguely aware of the mysterious stranger operating the control panel of the techno-trousers. He looked pretty tense in my view, and I would never recommend his nefarious goings-on to those of a nervous disposition. He operated the control panel. I was whisked up and over and past the laser beam until I was dangling above what seemed like a hefty lump of glittering glass. In the moonlight, even more sparkling rays glistened from it than I've ever noticed shine from the pint tankard I keep in the larder for special occasions. This was, I've since learnt, the prize diamond in the museum's exhibition, known worldwide, I dare say, as the star of somewhere or other. At this point, the mysterious red crash helmet I was wearing opened up, and from it lowered a grabbing device, which just failed to grasp the diamond. The position of my feet on the ceiling was delicately adjusted, and the grabber lowered again. This time it seized the diamond and lifted it upwards, but then, would you believe it, the diamond slipped from the grabber and almost fell to the floor. I hate to think of the perspiration pouring off that mysterious stranger as he frantically adjusted the trouser controls. Suffice to say, the grabber swung down and seized the diamond just before it hit the floor, but at the expense of wrenching my foot out of position and with it a ceiling tile. The result of this maneuver being that I swung through the laser beam, leading to what I can only describe as mayhem. The museum's alarm system proved itself both efficient and noisy. Noisy enough, in fact, to wake me up. There I was, hanging upside down in a strange dark room with a huge sparkling diamond dangling from my head. Bemused might be too mild a word to describe my feelings. To my way of thinking, things were not quite right. Some primeval instinct seemed to lead me towards the exit, but my way was barred by a security door. I must be dreaming. By this time, of course, I wasn't. The techno-trousers turned and marched me towards the window. They clearly got the right idea. The moment my metallic feet clamped themselves onto the window, it swung completely round, head over tail, and left me. But to find out just where it left me, I'm afraid you'll have to turn over. No, I don't mean turn over in bed. I mean turn over to the other side of the cassette. I'll be waiting there to tell you exactly where the window left me. Are you there? Grand. Now, if you remember, the metallic feet of the techno trousers had clamped themselves onto a window in the City Museum at a considerable height above ground. The window had swung completely round, and it left me outside the building. I was not happy. Not happy at all. Help! Where am I? You'll be hearing from my solicitor about this. The mysterious stranger ignored all threats of legal action, jumped on my back, grasped the contraband diamond, and guided the techno trousers towards the street below. Dazed I might be, but I knew matters were not thoroughly tickety-boo. I'm a respectable citizen, I protested. But the trousers led me home, willy-nilly. Back at West Wallaby Street, the mysterious stranger removed a red rubber glove from his head and revealed himself as the Penguin. Good grief! It's you! In all fairness, it must have been my dozy condition that had blinded me to my captor's identity, but now I was determined to assert myself. Let me out of these trousers this minute. The Penguin's response was to guide me into my best wardrobe and shut the door on me. I protested, as you would. This is nearly new. But he was not one to be diverted by aesthetic considerations. I'll give you what for, you tyke. Through the wardrobe keyhole, I watched the next act of the drama unfold. The Penguin had just put the diamond into a canvas sack when Gromit arrived. He stood in the doorway, teeth bared, hackles aloft, a fine display of dogged determination to give the felon the very what-for I'd been threatening. Gromit was only put off when the Penguin produced a gun, forced him into the wardrobe with me, and locked the door on the pair of us. This is a fine how-do-you-do, I was commenting, when I noticed Gromit fiddling with my trousers, or rather the techno trousers. He was doing something strange with the wiring. Suddenly my metallic feet were thumping up and down, and the wardrobe was shaking in a manner that was doing it no good at all. The body of the wardrobe, which I'd painstakingly assembled from a DIY pack but a few months before, separated itself from the base. There goes my knotty pine! I couldn't see a thing, but we were clearly on the move. Seconds later, the wardrobe crashed into the door frame and was disassembled to smithereens. I was trying to remember where I'd secreted the guarantee when I spotted the Penguin slide down the banisters and land neatly on the 2215 for hallway halt. Gromit leapt after him and found himself hanging on the lampshade above the hallway, quite fortuitously, as it did need a dusting. Penguin now revealed his ruthless streak by firing at the dangling Gromit. The bullet sighed through the wires above the light, requiring, I reflected, another visit to the hardware shop. and Gromit, in his turn, landed neatly on the middle carriage of the 2215. The lampshade, in its turn, landed neatly on Gromit's head, proving itself a worthy helmet and deflecting further bullets. The Penguin was clearly hoping to make good his escape via the front door, but Gromit, skilled railway dog that he is, reached out and changed a set of points, thus sending the train racing round a U-bend in the track and back up the hallway. The 2215 was now behind schedule, but needs must when you're dealing with a ruthless armed robber. At this juncture, I was unable to slow my own irresistible progress downstairs to the hallway, and found myself stepping onto the rear carriage of the 2215. Gromit, I'm right behind you! The Penguin spotted the significance of this development as he fired at the approaching breakfast room junction points, which changed just in time to separate my carriage from the rest of the train. I sped along a siding adjacent to the main line and indeed overtook the 2215. Everything under control, I reassured Gromit as I leant down and removed the gun from the Penguin's grasp. I'll take that, if you don't mind. Politeness never comes amiss, I believe, whatever the circumstances. I'd not bargained for the limited extent of the siding and found myself crashing into the buffers and flying headfirst through the serving hatch into the kitchen, where I landed on what I've always considered among the handiest of my domestic purchases, a vegetable rack on casters, which, with the impact, naturally took off at high speed. Undeterred by the sudden aroma of Spanish onion, I scrambled onto the rear carriage just as Gromit was about to reach out for the Penguin. Get him, Gromit! But his lunge merely caused the engine and fire tender to detach themselves from the rest of the train and race ahead. The Penguin then changed the next set of points, sending Gromit and me hurtling along the uncompleted living room branch line towards the French windows. We were doomed! I was certain to collapse in a glass-strewn heap on the patio, but no! Again, Gromit demonstrated some speed of thought by grabbing handfuls of spare track and laying it in front of our speeding vehicles. His new track led us back past the sofa, under the dining table, and across the main kitchen-to-front door line at the very moment the Penguin was racing past. I was thus enabled to snatch up the engine itself. Gotcha! Leaving our enemy riding ever slower on the fire tender. The techno-trousers chose this opportune moment to stroll across the line in front of the tender, which crashed into a massive magnetic boot and so sent the Penguin flying through our humble abode. Gromit, still laying track like a one-dog team of hourly paid navvies, sped into the kitchen and crashed into the dresser. An empty milk bottle dropped into Gromit's front paw, and into the bottle dropped the Penguin. The sack containing the precious diamond dropped into his other front paw as I slid towards him across the polished linoleum. Attaboy, Gromit lad! Ha-ha! A few days later, while Gromit avidly read newspaper reports of the comeuppance of Feathers McGraw, for such was the real name of our ex-lodger, I was able to contemplate over a plate of cheese and cream crackers that the reward money had paid off all our debts. No more lodgers, I promised. More trouble than they're worth. We had, I should mention, decided to dispense with the techno-trousers. On reflection, they too had caused a spot of bother. All's well that ends well, that's what I say. Oddly, I had the faintest suspicion I could hear the familiar sound of the trousers strolling along the street outside. But that was impossible, of course. Oh, I do like a bit of gorgonzola, I remarked, as I reflected that perhaps it was just as well we were bidding farewell to the wrong trousers. Of your average night, I enjoy, I'm glad to say, the sleep of the just, a jolly good 8 hours. But this particular night, shortly after Gromit and I started up our Wallace and Gromit wash and go window cleaning service, I must have stirred for some 3 or 4 seconds. I had a sense the house was shaking, possibly due to the passing by of a large truck, and maybe I'd heard the faint sound of a small animal. I thought nothing more of it, mind. Woke up on the morrow, as per, and put my morning arrangements into operation. Porridge today, Gromit. Tuesday. Gromit did the necessary. My bed turned upright, and with a hearty cry of Geronimo, I slipped through the dining room seat. My dressing machinery soon got me fully clothed, and I had a moment to take in the headlines on Gromit's newspaper. Wool shortage and sheep rustling continues. Worrying for a dog as keen on knitting as Gromit. Then he put our porridge cannon into operation. A good dollop of my regular Tuesday breakfast spread above the dining table and landed spot on in my best bowl. But before I'd a chance to add milk, another dollop flew across the room, and then another, and another, straight at me. I was diving and ducking and defending myself for dear life, but by the time the cannon ran out of ammo, I was plastered against the wall beneath a veritable morass of soggy oatmeal. It was then Gromit discovered the porridge cannon wiring had been seriously nibbled. Mice, do you think? I ruminated as I set off to make my own breakfast. Other signs appeared. Bites had been taken from the rubber plant, and a hole had been gnawed in the porridge oat box. Well, I'll be... Chunks had been munched from a slab of gorgonzola cheese. Have you been peckish during the night? I asked Gromit. But he was as baffled as myself. We both had the strangest sense of tiny footsteps about the place. There's something very fishy going on, I opined as I settled down with the morning paper, only to find a huge hole had been nibbled out of its middle, and the earlier wool shortage had been reduced to an wool shortage. I put my feet up on the poof and contemplated calling in the pest control people. But then the phone rang and business matters took over. Wallace and Gromit's wash and go window cleaning service, may we be of assistance? A lady's voice replied, requesting attention to the windows of the wool shop in the High Street. On our way, madam. As I put the phone down, I couldn't but notice signs of fresh nibbling around the upper edges of the poof. Good as our word, the Wallace and Gromit organization sprang into action. My armchair sped upwards on a metal column and thrust me through a cavity in the wall onto a slide, down which I sped into my Wellington boots before I was turned head over heels and my head inserted into a crash helmet. I was swung upside down as I collected a sponge and bucket from hinged rods on either side, and then I was fed into my overalls and onto our motor bicycle and sidecar combination. Gromit stepped into the sidecar, onto which telescopic arm A clamped our window cleaning ladder, just as telescopic arm B thrust forward a weighty boot to kick-start the engine. The garage opened, the ornamental pond swung from sight to be replaced by crazy paved driveway, and we were all systems go. As we arrived top speed in the High Street, Gromit aimed one end of our ladder into the gutter and vaulted towards an upstairs window above the wool shop, where, I couldn't help but observe he came face to face with a notably stern-visaged canine. Never one to be put off the task in hand, Gromit arranged one end of a bungee rope around a handy piece of guttering, swung upside down, and bounced back towards the pavement, where I equipped him with sponge and squeegee. As Gromit bounced back towards the roof, I glanced into the wool shop, where my eye was taken by the lady proprietor. I recalled Gromit's passion for knitting. Need wool, don't you, lad? And made my way inside. I barely had time to take in the cheerful array of brightly coloured balls of wool before I was charmed by the lady proprietor's opening gambit. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she smiled. It was only when I reached out to select a ball of red wool for Gromit that I noticed the lurking figure of the stern-visaged canine, as mentioned heretofore, glancing through a newspaper with the headline, "Even More Sheep Rustling." The lady proprietor did the honours, introducing the creature as her dog, Preston. "All right, Pooch, eh? Aha!" Preston glared as I patted his head. I should have been concentrating on my wool selection, because, before I knew it, the whole neatly stacked display of balls was tumbling from the shelf about my feet. "Oh dear!" The lady proprietor was at my side in a flash, eager to alleviate my embarrassment, compounded by a scornful glance from Gromit as he bungeed up and down on the far side of the window. We knelt and picked up scattered balls of wool until our fingers touched. "Oh," I remarked. "Oh," replied the lady proprietor. Her dog might have snarled as he stalked from the shop, but I had other concerns on my mind. The lady proprietor's name, for example. It was Ramsbottom. Gwendoline Ramsbottom, a name with a certain poetry about it. "Is this place yours?" I inquired. Her father had left her the shop, along apparently with his debts and a few other things, being something of an inventor. "Never!" I exclaimed. "Ha, ha, ha, ha. Well, I do a bit of that myself." My tongue was loosened now. "I see they haven't caught those sheep rustlers. Still, you've got plenty of wool, eh?" We could have chatted all day, but Gwendoline called my attention to Gromit's current plight. The bounce had gone from his bungee, and he was hanging upside down outside the shop window, wearing one of his more vexed expressions. As I stepped out to rescue him, Gwendoline commented on the quality of our service, referring to her windows as spanking. I must admit the glass in the shop door was now so clean you wouldn't even know it was there. Indeed, I walked straight into it. Ow! Back at 62 West Wallaby Street, I was eager to get on with the day's business. "Let's get that kettle on," but was stopped in my tracks by the condition of the house. It was in what I can only describe as chaos. Everything upside down, tins open, bottles spilt. "Good grief, what's all this? Burglars?" A sound caught our attention, and when Gromit and I went to investigate, what should we come upon but a tiny, multicoloured lamb? The little chap stood there, covered in everything from plum jam to gravy browning, gnawing a chicken bone quite devoid of flesh. The penny dropped. This was the fellow, my lad, who'd been nibbling his way through our domicile. "Heavens above, Gromit, look at this. Little chap must be really hungry." I picked him up. "Come here, lad. No need to be sheepish. We'll have to get you cleaned up." Down to the cellar we went, and I popped the lamb into the cleansing bath of my recent invention, Wallace's Knit-O-Matic. It processes wool from sheep's back to cozy jumper, untouched by human hand. Nothing to fret over, I reassured our unexpected visitor. Just a quick shampoo. Strange. As Gromit activated the Knit-O-Matic and set the machine to its wash program, we had the sense of being watched. Yet we seemed to be alone. The washing cycle was soon underway, and the lamb was getting well and truly cleansed when the machine started to play up. The fault flag was flashing, and the program setting changed from wash to light shave. Oh heck! The suction tube lowered itself towards the cleansing bath, and the helpless lamb was sucked upward into the auto-dry apparatus. Do something, Gromit! Too late. Pistons pounded, clippers clipped, and strands of wool were fed at top speed into the knitting apparatus. Moments later, a fully fashioned, miniature, chunky pullover was flung from the Knit-O-Matic and landed on my head. Very cosy it was too, if a bit tight round the ears and nose. I peered over the tiny neckband in time to see the young lamb, thoroughly sheared, emerge from the Knit-O-Matic. We'll call him Sean, eh? I proffered as we all left the cellar. I paused at the top of the steps. Had I heard something? Had we been observed? Later on, young Sean was snug in the pullover I'd passed on to him. Only fair, really. It was his wool, and Gromit was reading his paper, Killer Dog on the Loose being the latest top story, while I worked on my adaptation of the porridge cannon. I'd an idea it would come in handy the next day. Gromit, you know we're doing the clock tomorrow. This was the town clock, of course, distinguishing feature of the clock tower in the High Street. Up his ladder, Gromit was working away on the clock face when I put the revised porridge cannon into action. At first firing, Gromit received a helping of suds straight between the eyes. But he soon got the knack of ducking at the right moment. The instant Gromit was fully supplied with cleansing requisites, I felt the urge to pop into Wendoline's wool shop. Back in a tick, won't be long. On my way across the road, I noticed her dog, Preston, stern-visaged as ever, glaring at Gromit from his upstairs window, while young Sean was popping inquisitively into the adjacent yard. I'd no time for investigation. There were matters to be discussed. Gwendoline wanted to know all about my inventions. My heart skipped an extra breath when she said how her daddy would have loved to have met me. Yet I felt disapproval in the air. Gromit had finished the clock tower and, on the pretext of giving the wool shop windows another going over, was fixing me with a hard look. Then it seems, whilst Gwendoline and I were engaged in our tete-a-tete, Gromit spotted young Sean peering from a hole in the wall above. He shinned up the ladder to investigate, popped his head through the hole, and found himself face to face with young Sean, only to be startled by the flash of a camera. Somehow he sensed the presence of Preston. Gromit sped down the ladder and hurried through the wool shop, ignoring my discussions with Gwendoline. Of all the women I've met, not that there have been many. In the room above he stumbled, so I gather, over a tin marked Preston's dog food, then spotted a picture of a butcher wielding a meat cleaver. The butcher's head was missing from the picture at the very point at which Gromit would have inserted his own head through the wall. From the yard outside he suddenly heard young Sean, and through the window he spotted the tiny lamb peering from a truck which was full to overflowing with stolen sheep. I was oblivious to these goings-on. What I'm trying to say, in a manner of speaking, it wasn't until Gromit had raced through the wool shop to the truck and released the sheep, and the sheep had flocked through the shop, carrying me off on a tidal wave of wool and mutton, that I spotted anything amiss. Meanwhile, Gromit had released young Sean, but got himself trapped inside the truck and driven off by stern-visaged Preston. Apparently, it would seem, directly to the police station. Next day, the papers were full of Gromit's arrest. The killer dog on the loose, and that was meant to be him. On every page was the photo of Gromit, seemingly in butchery garb, and apparently aiming a meat cleaver at young Sean. Not the Gromit I knew, but what could I think? Oh, you've really let us down this time, lad. Then I had a visitor. Once I'd struggled through my guests. Oh, did I mention I was putting the stolen sheep up till we could find them proper lodgings? I opened the front door to find Gwendoline on the step in a bit of a state. She insisted I should stay away from her shop, and from what she referred to as her silly, silly windows. She rushed down the drive saying how she was no good for me, and crying into her hanky, and saying how sorry she was about Gromit. I was that speechless, I said nought. On the other hand, something had to be done. In his prison cell, Gromit, I've since learnt, was well stuck into a book he'd always meant to read, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, when a strange parcel arrived. It contained a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Gromit's normally a dab hand at jigsaws, but night had fallen before he finished this one. Then he noticed he'd assembled a secret message. Friday night, 8 p.m., be ready, a friend, it read. Suddenly Gromit realized it was 8 p.m. on Friday night, and who should appear at the window of his cell but young Sean. The lamb turned out to be quite nifty with a power-driven hacksaw, and with it he sliced through the bars like a knife through a lump of Wensleydale cheese. Gromit nipped out of the window and joined young Sean on top of a swaying 50-foot-high column of sheep held up by yours truly. Ha-ha! Brilliant teamwork, lads! Sitting on the edge of a moorland field surrounded by sheep, Gromit and I were considering his position. I suppose you'll have to skip the country. A fugitive, eh? When a light fell across the frosty grass, and a familiar truck crashed through the gate. It stopped by the sheep. A figure in shepherd's clothing stepped out. The figure turned. I recognized it. Gromit had silenced me with a chilly paw across my mouth. Gwendoline, for it was she, blew a shepherd's whistle. Preston emerged from the driving seat and herded all the sheep into the truck, except for young Sean. With one of his glares, Preston strode threateningly towards the lamb until Gwendoline stepped in. "Stop it!" she cried. "I've had enough of this rustling. It wasn't so bad when it was just for the wool. Daddy didn't create you for this." What could she mean? We found out soon enough. Gromit and myself observed this drama in disguise as a scarecrow. Gromit on my shoulders and me on the driving seat of our motor bicycle and sidecar combination. We saw Preston turn on Gwendoline and drive her and young Sean into the truck with the sheep. "Let me out!" she cried. "You're not going to turn me into dog meat." Dog meat. Another penny dropped. There was a clue as to Preston's little schemes. Moments later, Preston was speeding back to town in the truck. Gromit and I were right on his tail in our motor bicycle and sidecar combination. "Don't worry, Gwendoline, I'm on my way." At any road, that's what I thought. We lost them. With typical cunning, Preston had pulled the truck off the road, let us speed past, and now he was right on our tail. But Gromit was up to snuff on the matter. He grabbed our window-cleaning ladder from the sidecar and fixed it upright, then shinned to the top and grabbed a set of handy overhead telephone wires, thus swinging the whole motor bicycle and sidecar combination through a complete backward circle so that we landed on the road behind the truck. Mind, it never rains, but it pours. The pin that held the motor bicycle to the sidecar chose that very moment to shake free, thus separating Gromit in the sidecar from me on the motor bicycle. Gromit sped towards a long-abandoned quarry, crashed through a sign saying, "Danger, 2,000-foot drop," and plunged towards solid rock below. Presence of mind could be Gromit's middle name, if only he had more than one name in the first place. He pressed a button which activated one of my inventions, and thus turned the sidecar into a single-engine aeroplane. Personally, I was atop our window-cleaning ladder and seizing hold of a lever at the rear of Preston's truck. "Don't worry, Gwendoline, everything's under control." I released the lever, lowering the tailgate of the truck. This left me in the position of a horizontal link between the back end of the truck and the front end of the motor bicycle. Young Sean led the other sheep from the truck across my prostrate back. By now, the weight of the sheep on the motor bicycle had caused the ladder to straighten up, somewhat in the manner of a speeding seesaw. No sooner had the sheep formed themselves into an upside-down pyramid shape along the lines of your typical military police motor bicycle display team than Preston played his next trick. He braked the truck hard, so the motor bicycle rammed into its rear, "Ow!" hurling the sheep and myself back into the truck, alongside Gwendoline. Up above, Gromit took a hand, and, using the porridge cannon in its latest incarnation as a flying machine gun, raked Preston's cab and truck with bursts of congealing breakfast cereal. But he was too late to bring the truck to a halt, and we sped up the high street towards the yard at the side of the wool shop. The doors swung open, and Gromit's circling sidecar disappeared from view as we were led towards the next phase of Preston's cunning. Inside a dimly lit warehouse, Gwendoline, the sheep, and myself were flung from Preston's truck into a copper trolley, which sped towards a familiar-looking machine labelled Preston's Knit-O-Matic. "Where'd you get that from? I've got patents pending." Yet another penny had dropped, making threepence thus far. Gromit and myself must indeed have been observed operating the Knit-O-Matic on young Sean by Preston, who then purloined the plans. There was no time for recrimination, however, as we were instantly plunged into the cleansing bath. Somehow young Sean had avoided the plunge. One cleansing had perhaps been enough, and as Preston lowered the suction tube, he flickered light switches, which alerted Gromit, circling above, to our position. Gromit guided the flying sidecar through the yard doors, through a security wall, and through an interior brick wall until he reached the warehouse where our porridge cannon came into its own. Attaboy, Gromit! He took aim and covered all the machinery in porridge, while Preston himself disappeared beneath cold cereal. The nose of the flying sidecar rammed into Preston, hurling Gromit into the rafters. Meanwhile, young Sean tugged on a rope and positioned the suction tube over Preston. We all looked on, open-mouthed, as Preston was sucked upwards and Gromit swung down to change the Nitomatic setting to close shave. Well done, Gromit! Pistons pounded, clippers flipped, and strands of wool woven from Preston's fur were fed into the knitting apparatus. Gwendoline was disturbed more than somewhat, crying out that Preston was malfunctioning, an expression that caused me a raised eyebrow, until she explained that he was a cyber dog, a robot. A steely hand smashed through the copper casing of the Nitomatic as Gwendoline explained that her daddy had created the robot dog for good, but he turned out evil, probably due to a faultily assembled electronic circuit, in my opinion. A fearsome metallic version of Preston now emerged from the Nitomatic and strode towards us, steely teeth bared, but then the machine itself took a hand. From the knitting apparatus emerged a long-sleeved steel wool pullover, which was flung over the head of the robotic Preston. He, or should I say it, crashed into a lever which shifted the floor on which we all stood towards a conveyor belt that was travelling towards a huge set of metal teeth, a sheep mincing thing. Now that's clever. The final penny of 4 in all had dropped. The evil Preston had been the killer dog all along, rustling sheep from hither and yon, mincing them up and canning them as Preston's dog food. Was that to be our fate? Once again, Gromit swung from above, this time knocking the robot Preston onto the conveyor belt. I tried pressing a nearby button, but only succeeded in upending the floor and hurling Gwendoline, the sheep, and myself onto the conveyor belt with him. Furiously, we struggled to escape the gigantic metal teeth. At the last second, young Sean came to the rescue, swinging down Gromit style and knocking Preston into the very jaws of the Nitomatic. The conveyor belt jammed and the rest of us were hurled into a relieved heap on the floor. By heck, I thought we were all for the can then. We watched the next phase of dog food manufacture get underway. One after another, dog food cans circled the machine on metal rails, and each of them was filled with cogs, springs, screws, rivets, and the like. Put it another way, Preston was being turned into his own dog food. A few weeks later, after all charges against Gromit had been dropped, Gwendoline came calling. With her was a cute, docile doggy, who gently handed me the evening paper clamped in his metallic jaws. Gwendoline thanked me kindly because, yes, I'd been at the leftovers of the robot Preston with my bits and pieces and assembled this perfectly acceptable canine companion. Give me a shout if he goes wrong again. I asked Gwendoline in for some cheese, but to my astonishment she refused. Never touches cheese, apparently, on account of a susceptibility to rashes. Not even Wensleydale. Ah, well, I mused as I waved goodbye, all the more for us, and not a sheep to worry us. But I'd spoke too soon. When I lifted the cover from the prized slice of Wensleydale I'd been saving for a special occasion, there was young Sean. He'd scoffed the lot. "Get off my cheese!" I couldn't be that irate, though. At least young Sean shares my passion for cheese, unlike Gwendoline. All in all, I think we can say I'd certainly had a close shave.